For the EFD Group, Mr. Farage.
Thank you. In your introduction, you said that the First World War was an industrial war, and indeed you've only got to drive 2 hours up the A4 from here and visit the battlefield at Verdun to see exactly what you were talking about. For those that haven't visited, I think it's probably the grimmest battlefield I've certainly visited on the Western Front, or indeed anywhere in the world, and it was something that had such a huge psychological effect on France that it very much dominated the thinking of Monnet and Schumann post 1945 that this awful thing must never happen again. And those of us in politics will all remember the rather famous photograph of quite a large German Chancellor Kohl and a rather small French President Mitterrand holding hands, standing in front of that ossiary at Douaumont. And so the whole European project comes from the disaster that was sparked by the First World War, and it is entirely understandable that people should have sought ways to prevent such awfulness. The difficulty is that they chose the wrong target. Monnet and Schumann decided, and it is shared today by Mr Barroso and the Cohn-Bendits and others, they decided that it was the existence of nation state that led to war, and therefore we have to abolish nation state. Actually, what we should have focused on post 1945 is not the abolition of states, it is to make sure that the European states were democratic, because democratic nation states do not go to war with each other. So I have to say that I believe the whole European project is based on a falsehood, and it is potentially a dangerous falsehood, because if you try to impose a new flag, a new anthem, a new president, a new army, police force, foreign policy, whatever else, if you try to impose that without first seeking the consent of the people, you are in danger actually of creating the very nationalisms and resentment that you sought to snuff out in the first place. We have done this all before. We did it after the First World War in the Balkans. We said we cannot have all these little Balkan states going around fighting with each other. Let us bring them together. Let us give them one flag, one anthem, one president, and let us call it Yugoslavia. And it led to horrific wars since 1990, the deaths of tens of thousands of people as people have fought to get out of a false state. The European Union is making a very similar mistake because there is no consent for this project. I have heard people this morning talking about the need for a United States of Europe on a federal model. You can only have that if people give consent for it, and nobody has. And when you put the constitution to the peoples of Europe, the first time you really come clean with the electors, they rejected it. I am not against Europe, but I am against this Europe. I want a Europe of independent, sovereign nation states that trade together, that work together, that cooperate together, and I believe the European elections this year will mark a turning point. The tide is turning. You are backing an outdated model that seeks to get rid of a problem that actually has not existed since 1945. Thank you.